Okay, class. Welcome to our discussion of narrative essay structure. This one's going to be short and sweet for this particular essay. It will be more complex for subsequent essays. So what kinds of paragraphs should you have in what order? You've not maybe written a story before, so you're not sure of what's in front of you. What are the kinds of things you need to include? So let's just get right into it. This is the only other slide. We'll work through this really quickly. First, I know we haven't discussed introductions and thesis statements. We will, but you're going to need an introduction and a thesis statement. You should have a conclusion that leaves your reader with more to think about. We haven't talked about conclusions yet, so set these aside for now. We'll get to those. Those are going to be a part of, I think, next week, or I don't know for Boyle's class when that's going to come up. I'll have to look at their syllabus. But it will come up at some point. So typically, what you're going to want to do after your introduction and thesis statement, whatever those happen to look like, any needed context paragraphs. So consider any information that your readers need to understand your story or whatever the heck it is you're talking about. So if I'm talking about myself as a Dungeons and Dragons player, so for my 002/007 classes, that's my personal identity narrative, or for the 012 for Boyle, that's my literacy narrative. I may need to give a paragraph that just describes what that game is to people who, maybe you've seen it in Stranger Things, but you're not really sure. So it's like, okay, my reader probably doesn't know this. So I need to tell them what it is. Or if I'm talking about myself as a Crohn's disease patient, after my introduction, I might have a paragraph that just gives specific information, like here's what Crohn's disease is. Reader, for you who may not know, here's a paragraph just about what it is, so you know what I'm talking about before I move forward. This is going to be pretty common in most styles of academic writing. After your introduction, you want to give your reader background information, context, definitions, things they might need in order to understand the rest of whatever it is you're going to say. That's also true in narratives. If I just launched into my history as a Crohn's disease patient, got through the whole thing, and never told you actually what it is, you're not going to be able to get as much out of the story as you otherwise could because you're going to lack understanding in some places. So keep in mind that your particular group you're talking about, or your particular literacy you're talking about, depending on which class you're in, it may well be that your reader, your fellow students in the room, and myself, we don't really know a lot about that. And in order to get the most out of the story that we can, we're going to need to know a lot about that. So go ahead and fill that in. Give us the definitions that you need to give us in order for us to understand what you mean. After that, story in chronological order. Pretty simple. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So this is not when I show structure slides. This is not one bullet point equals one paragraph. This is probably going to be like one paragraph for your introduction. It's very common in early essays like this. One paragraph for your conclusion. One, maybe two paragraphs for different kinds of context that you need to give. I don't really know. It entirely depends on the story you're trying to tell. And then your story in whatever chronological order it's going to be, beginning, middle, and end. If you've watched the paragraph video, it's like, okay, the beginning of the story, the middle, and the end, those are at different times. It's probably going to end up being like three different paragraphs in here. Maybe more, maybe less. It entirely depends on what sort of compositional choices you as a writer make, or the kind of story you have to tell, and the way in which you want to tell it. So I can't really give more advice other than to say, give it a shot. And then when I look at your individual papers, I can give you more specific advice based on what you've in particular written. But as a general sweeping sort of thing at this point, nah. Chronological order, that's what you're looking at for this one. If you're one of those avant-garde writers who wants to try non-linear storytelling, I'm not going to tell you no, but I'm going to tell you to be careful with it, and maybe if it doesn't work out, just adjust things into chronological order. But this is pretty simple because Unit 1's a narrative, narratives are stories. Stories have built-in structure. Chronological order is often the easiest one. When we revisit this for like Unit 2 and Unit 3, it's like, okay, now I'm writing an analysis paper. how do I structure that? I don't have chronological order. And it's like, probably don't, but there are things to do. Or for your argument, it's like, okay, I'm not, chronological order doesn't make sense when I'm, trying to do this problem proposal in this way. It's just like, no, it probably doesn't. But there are ways to structure your essays. There are still general principles for essay structure that can go into that later, and we'll talk about that in those subsequent units. But for now, this is basically what you're looking at. Introduction, thesis statement, again, we'll cover those. Any background information you think your reader needs, whether or not it's the kind of situation you were in at life at the time, whether or not it's the specific literacy/group you're talking about, or just whatever. If you think your reader needs to know something, be upfront with it, give it to them. It'll help make the rest of the story make sense to them. And then your chronological order, story, conclusion, and you're done. That's basically it. And so this may end up being, if you have one context paragraph for the particular group/literacy you're talking about, and then like 3 paragraphs here, beginning, middle, and end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe it ends up being like a 6-paragraph essay at its basis, or maybe more, maybe less. It really, really entirely depends. I will also suggest that it might just be good practice to get used to giving your reader background information. So maybe go ahead and do this even if you think your reader doesn't need to know any additional background information. Like if I'm talking about, oh, I'm really into Auburn football and my audience is from Alabama, the odds are they're all going to know what I mean by that, and I don't really have to break it down for them. Go ahead and put that paragraph in there anyway, just as good writing practice for, okay, I'm going to explain this to my reader as if they don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to give them some good details that help them understand why Auburn football is so great and even what it is in the first place. And that's basically it. If you have any questions about it, let me know. I know it's kind of general. I will be able to give you as individuals far better guidance when I'm looking at your specific papers during conferences for O012, and just some feedback in general during lab for 002/007 sections. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, have a great night and go on with your crazy bad writing.